Some things in life feel good, but don't end up being good for us. And other things feel not so good, but end up being really good for us. And part of spiritual growth is really recognizing and understanding the difference between those two. And today I want to talk to you about surrender. And surrender is one of those things that as you try to practice it in your life, it will feel uncomfortable, it will feel challenging, it will feel stretching, but it's one of the most healthy things that we can do for our spiritual lives. And surrender, if I could just kind of define it this way, it's really entrusting God with things that we want to hold on to ourselves. And surrender, we might have different connotations when we hear that word. When I was a young kid, I used to watch this really cheesy, terrible martial arts movie. It was called No Retreat, No Surrender. And the idea was, you never give up. Surrender is this terrible thing. But in our spiritual lives, surrender is the pathway to some of God's best gifts and God's best blessings in our life. But there is a paradoxical reality to it. Jesus in the Gospels, he would often say things like this. He would say, if you want to save your life, you must lose it. He would say, if you want to follow after me, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow after me. He said one time that a seed, until it falls in the ground and dies, only then can it bear fruit and really, do good things. And so there's always this paradoxical reality of following God where, you have to enter death to find new life. That we will have these moments with God where we're giving something up, and it might feel like a certain type of death, but in it is actually the life that God has for us. And these are the kind of experiences that this discipline of surrender is all about. Because here's the truth, that sometimes we hold on to things that we're not necessarily meant to, and in holding on, it creates damage in our spiritual lives and our lives in this world and our purpose towards God. I remember my cousin, we were very young and we were riding bikes in the metro parks, and he was kind of coming down this hill and I was already down, so I was just kind of watching him, and he hit this little ditch, and he went over the front of his handlebars. But I saw the whole time he never let go of the handlebars. So his hands are right here and his body is just going over. And now you could say on the one hand, man, way to have a great grip on that. And he did. He did not let it go. But once he landed and all of it was done, he ended up breaking both his wrists because he held on when he should have let go. And there's just many experiences in life where, again, if we hold on, it will hurt us, and it will keep us back from God's best. And so today I want to talk to you just about two different types of surrender. And I want to read to you from Hebrews chapter 12, and here's what it says. It says this: therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God. So if you kind of get the whole imagery and metaphor of this passage, it's a race. And it's us running this race that God has for us, which is our life. And we're running, and there's this whole crowd around us, and they're cheering us on, and they're encouraging us. But the author is saying, but as you're running this race for God, you carry unnecessary weight. And he said, and part of running this race well is laying that weight aside. Or what we're going to talk about today is surrendering that unnecessary weight. And this is the first type of surrender that I want you to think about today, that all of us are carrying extra weight in the race that God has for us. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would anyone do that? Unless you're like a CrossFitter, one of those crazy people, and you're wearing a weighted vest and running around. Why would you add weight to yourself for the race that you have? Now, none of us, I think, do it intentionally, but all of us are carrying weight that God says you don't have to carry it on this race in your life. And in fact, if you surrender it, you'll have more strength and more endurance. You'll run faster and farther when you lay this aside. And that's what this discipline of surrender is about. And so, what are the unhealthy things that we're carrying today that God says at any point, at any time, you can lay those aside? Let me give you some examples of what that might look like in our lives. For some of us, maybe, there's a lot of shame that we're carrying. We are just brutal to ourselves in our own head. We've struggled to forgive ourselves. We get caught up in just all the ugliness of choices that we made, things we didn't do, opportunities that were missed, and our life just gets weighed down with this. And today I want you to know you can surrender that to God. And here's why: because Christ has forgiven all that. The Lord says, as far as the east is from the west, I have taken away your transgressions. So in other words, that's something we can carry it, but we don't have to. And we can surrender it. For some of us, maybe we're carrying a lot of fear in our life. We're just afraid of how we're going to pay the bills, how we're going to take care of our family, what challenges might lay ahead. And we get so inundated with our sense of fear and all the scenarios that we play like a movie in our mind. And I just want to remind you that God just simply promises to each of us that He will take care of us. I've been reading through Matthew's Gospel, and I came across the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, there's just these very simple promises where God says, hey, look at all the birds of the field. Look at, the wildlife out there. Do you ever see them starving? Do you ever see them with a sign that says, I'll work for food? You don't. God takes care of them. And then Jesus turns that and He says, and do you think that God cares more about you than them? He certainly does. And if He takes care of them, He's going to take care of you. And that is so incredibly simple, but so incredibly powerful. And so some of the fears that we carry in this life are things that are slowing our race down, but maybe today we can surrender. Now here's another kind of category to think about. What are the unhealthy coping mechanisms in our life? What are the things that we go to when we're stressed, when we're worried, when we're hurting, that actually just distance us from God? All of us probably, if we're honest, we have some unhealthy ways of dealing with pain and frustration and anger and hurt and fear and all those things in our life. Maybe some of us, we numb ourselves with food. Maybe we numb ourselves with TV. We numb ourselves with social media. We numb ourselves with all these kinds of, and these are the types of things that I think God is calling us to say, you can surrender these because I have better resources to help you navigate the difficulties of life. And not only that, if you surrender these, you can run your race in a better way. So I want you just to think for a moment in your own life, and I want to think in my life, what are just the unhealthy things that we can lay aside today? What is the unnecessary weight that you and I are carrying in our race that God is inviting us today to say, hey, surrender that to me. I know you think that's serving you. I know you think that's helping you. I know you're like, how am I going to deal with all the struggle without these things? And God's promise to us is He will help us, He will provide, and He will fulfill us in a greater way than these other things that we're looking to. So that's the first type of surrender. Here's the second type I want to talk to you about. It's the surrender of our hopes and dreams in the direction of our life. Psalm 37 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Jesus, again in the Sermon on the Mount, He says to seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and the rest will be added to you. And again, we're called to seek God's kingdom and God's glory above our own hopes and dreams. And that's a surrender issue. See, many times we want to get God, to be like the one who makes sure that our hopes and dreams are accomplished. And we want to have a relationship with God where we can sort of pull that out of him and adjust him to our plans. But here's what the scriptures constantly call us to do, to adjust our will to God's will. Jesus, when he taught his disciples to pray, he said, pray like this: your kingdom come, your will be done. And surrender is about entrusting God with our plans, with our hopes, and with our dreams. And say, God, there's things that I want, there's things that I hope for. And friends, there's nothing wrong with goals, with hopes and dreams. Those are all good things. But here's where surrender helps us. It says, but God, what I want most is what you want. What I want most is your will, is your kingdom, is your glory, and your agenda. And here's what's so amazing about God, is God will fulfill the desires of your heart. If we try to fulfill those desires ourselves, we will miss God and we will miss those desires. We'll miss both of them. If we seek God first and we just surrender our lives and say, Lord, my life is yours. Do with it what you want. I trust you. And if we do that and we seek God, we get God, and here's God's promise to you: the rest will be added to you. I will fulfill the desires of you. Get both of them. It's an unbelievable deal, but the way to enter into it is surrender. And sometimes we just have to have those honest moments before God where we just say, Lord, I trust you with my life. Just direct me, show me the way, and there will always be a yes in my heart. And if you've never done that, I want to encourage you to find a quiet space and to do that this week with God. Just unreservedly, no conditions, just offer your life to God and say, Lord, it's all yours. All that I want is what you want. And it can be a beautiful moment of surrender. And I would just encourage you, if you're a high school student or you're a college student, you're a young adult watching this, and you by God's grace, probably have decades of life ahead, I want you to see surrender as a lens to view your whole life. Because what would it look like if just now, as a younger man or a younger woman, you just started saying to God, God, direct it all. However many decades I might have, Lord, I want them all to be for you and for your glory. And I trust that the hopes and dreams of my life you will fulfill in your way, in your time. Because I'm telling you, God's way is always better. And until we entrust the deepest parts of our soul and life, only then can they experience the resurrection to be what God actually wants them to be. When you and I hold on to them, guess what? We ruin them and they ruin us. But when we entrust them to God, God brings life to them and brings new purpose, and He's glorified in it. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you have a great discussion.